As the hours wane down until the MLB trade deadline, Dave Dombrowski and the Phillies are still searching for the final pieces to elevate this team. With one of the rising needs becoming in the bullpen, Chad Green has been mentioned as a name they are keeping an eye on. Me and Luke Arcaini are going to break down what that means for this Phillies team, what kind of role he could play, and if he could be a difference maker come postseason time, and everything else that you need to know. Now, before we dive fully into it, I do want to make sure that you guys are smashing that subscribe button. That at this point in time, 97.3% of you guys tuning into these videos have not subscribed to the channel just yet. We got to get that Phillies Digest family growing, so make sure you're smashing the subscribe button and following along with all the awesome content we're going to be pumping out from now until hopefully they win that World Series in October, I guess November at that point. But a lot of work to do until then. So Luke, I'm going to dive in and talk a little bit about Chad Green. Let's talk about what he is, what he could mean to this team, and anything else. So the floor is yours to start things off.
Yeah, Chad Green, Blue Jays reliever. He's a little on the older side, 33, but he's having a really good year for the Blue Jays. Made his debut back in 2016, was with the Yankees all the way up until last year. And then he signed with the Blue Jays at the beginning of last year. Last year was a rough one. A little bit of injuries last year for him, but not the best stats if you look at him. This year's been completely different. 30 appearances, 31 innings, 1.74 ERA, 0.9 WHIP, 27 strikeouts to 9 walks, just 19 hits allowed in 31 innings, which is really good. He has 7 saves for the Blue Jays. Not your flashy, big time like breaking a reliever. I think that they can still be in on, but definitely a very solid right-handed reliever. I mean, anytime you can get a guy with an ERA under 2, that's pretty good. With that whip under 1 especially, because that's really the stat you have to look at more with relievers as the whip and not. We've turned into a time where ERAs is definitely misleading. If anybody watched the Phillies game last night, just about all 3 of those runs should not have been earned for Christopher Sanchez.
Shout out Bryce Harper.
After all those miscues and errors. But yeah, so not the flashiest name, but one, a name that would definitely make an impact, and 2, I think would be more of a name to fill that new hole where Sir Anthony Dominguez was.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And to dive into the report that we did get as far as where this came from, it is from John Morosi here, who tweeted that the Blue Jays right-handed pitcher Chad Green is one of the Phillies' top targets. Sources said he's allowed a .590 OPS since the start of June. Not great there. Of note, Rob Thomson was on the Yankees coaching staff when Green debuted in New York. So that is a little connection. I do think that does matter in the context of when they are targeting players, and if that's a guy that Topper believes in, would it certainly move him up on the list of priorities. I also think, as you mentioned, this is not the sexy pick, the big swing, but this is something that I could see just a solid move where you don't got to dig too deep in the pockets, which does seem to be a pretty significant concern of Dave Dembrowski. I know the reputation of him as kind of a gunslinger, a massive trade guy, but he also got this report here saying that the Phillies are not currently listening to offers for Andrew Painter or Aiden Miller. Now, obviously, a guy like Chad Green is not a dude that I'm saying you should dig in the pockets and be sending out these type of prospects are, but I was a little surprised to hear that report there, Luke. So what did you think about that, and do you buy it, or do you think this is another kind of trade deadline smokescreen?
Yeah, I'm buying into all of these smoke screens. I don't trust a damn thing that anyone says until it actually happens. I don't buy what Dave Dombrowski said. I think they're still looking. They're always still look. Listen, if you're a GM, it doesn't matter what team you are, whether you're the best team or the worst team. Until 6 o'clock on Tuesday, you are looking to get better, or you're looking into your future, right? No GM is just sitting on his hands once he makes a deal, right? They're always wheeling and dealing. So I'm not buying anything. I'm not buying those comments about they're good in the outfield. I'm not buying that. I still think they're going to get multiple bullpen pieces. Whether that's a Chad Green and a big name like an Estevez, like a Tanner Scott, that would be best case scenario, right? If they could come out of this deadline with, let's just say Chad Green and Tanner Scott, that is a win. That is a win for the deadline. That is a replacement for maybe that Sir Anthony role. And I mean, right now, Chad Green's better than Sir Anthony was. That it's a good 590 OPS. Like that's a good number since a beginning of June. And for a guy like Scott, like we've talked about a lot already, like that is my all-in bullpen move right now. I think getting another lefty in this bullpen would be crucial. I think being able to add one righty, one lefty, I think that's your best case scenario. And I think if they could do that with a Chad Green as the starting piece to upgrading the bullpen, that would be a win. If this was the only move, if this was your high-end reliever move, I think that's a disappointment. Because I think Chad Green is good. I don't think he's be out there in the ninth inning of a World Series game type of guy. And that's still a guy that I want the Phillies to go get. And that could be that the Estevez, the Tanner Scott, the Kyle Finnegan sort of role there.
Yeah, totally agree there. And that's probably my fear at this point is that, like, it doesn't feel like they're so committed to being all in for this season, which is really frustrating to me. And now, granted, I could absolutely be eating these words and hope I am in a couple days from now if they do land that big swing and get that big fish to elevate this team. But there was an interesting quote from Dave Dembrowski that I did want to pull up here saying that because there are more buyers than sellers, quote, if you're going to make a trade for somebody that you really want, you better be aggressive. He said that trade talks are further along than previous years at this point. And that quote obviously coming yesterday, shortly following the Hayes trade there. Kind of obviously like an effect of the expanded postseason with the additional wild card slot and everything else, that there's not as many teams that are willing to sell at this point in the season. I think that's good for baseball overall, but obviously puts the Phillies in a little bit more difficult spot here. So with this Phillies team, we kind of already talked about bullpen being a point of need, and then that only furthered when you did give up Sir Anthony Dominguez. So I know you mentioned kind of one of your concerns has been a little bit of how many righties that are on this roster, and for what it's worth, you tweeted out that following the Sir Anthony Dominguez trade, Jeff Hoffman, Orion Kirkring, Jose Ruiz, and Junior Marte are all right-handed options. Having Hoffman, Estevez, or Kirkring all as right-handed options in the same bullpen would be just filthy. So obviously not directly tied to that name, but kind of a thought process there. This is another righty that we're talking about in Chad Green here. Are you kind of concerned in the right-hand, left-hand thing, and do you think that's something that should tie into the decision, or for you, is it just get the best arms as possible?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a mix of both of them for me. Like I think being even when it comes to the lefty righty thing is important. When we played the Padres, one of their biggest weaknesses was they were like all right-handers,
Yeah.
which I think was helping the Phillies. But I also think it also just comes down to getting the best arms, right? Like if your move if you're low on righties and the only reliever left is a guy like Tanner Scott, I mean, get him. Like there's no reason for you to hold back just because he's a lefty. And listen, having lethal lefties is rare. Like that's not a thing. You see way more betted right-handed relievers than you do lefty right now in baseball. So I'm not so hung up on the right-handed thing. I still would like them to get one righty, one lefty. I think that's just the best case scenario. But if they got like say two righties or two lefties, I wouldn't be like incredibly mad. I don't think it matters a ton. I just think right now for me like the best case scenario would be one righty, one lefty.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. Now, a couple videos ago, I checked in and said my panic meter has risen above 0 for this Phillies team. That I understand it's a long season. There's plenty more ball to play, and ultimately they will be judged off what happens in the postseason. But it's been bad baseball lately, Luke. So I kind of wanted to gauge and check in with you again. Do you think this is something that them just hitting a little bit of a rut in the season? Do you think it's something that a spark of talent being injected to the roster could fix? Or is you still completely steady, not worried whatsoever for how this Phillies team has looked?
Yeah, I think it's just one of those highs and lows of a baseball season. I think they just hit a dead patch.
Sure.
I mean, every team in baseball has hit a dead patch this season. The Yankees lost like 17 of 22.
True.
I mean, granted, the Yankees are frauds, but like everyone just hits that patch. Like it just happens. I don't really know how to explain it. I've watched baseball for so long that I'm just genuinely just like I'm just numb to it at this point. Like I know it's going to happen eventually, and we are in it. I've already said we have hit it at the best time. I know it's bad to say that, but we have hit the bad patch at the best possible time. The last week and a half before the trade deadline, you lose a bunch of games and you realize what you need and you realize what this team needs to go from really good to elite. Listen, they're still an elite baseball team. They have the best record in the league. They're the best team in the National League. They're the best team in baseball, right? They're the best all-around team in baseball. They're just going through a rut. But I think in the best way to say it, I think sometimes it's good for a team to go through a rut like this, because I don't want a team to just go win 140 games straight and then, like, you know what I
Sure.
mean? Like I think there needs to be some sort of wake up call in every season. I think wake up calls help a lot of teams, and I think this is sort of the one right now, because listen, they're in a tough stretch right now. They have a tough stretch of games over the next week. It already started off. They had Minnesota, they have Cleveland, and then after this, they have a Yankees team who, even though they aren't, I don't think that good, it's always the Yankees. Like, they'll always still be a threat to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have Cleveland, Yankees, Mariners, Dodgers, Diamondbacks, who have won like 18 of their last 23, right? So they have a very tough stretch here, and I think it's good that they're kind of getting this wake up call, because we know that this first half schedule wasn't the hardest schedule.
Sure.
But I think it's good for them to kind of see where they match up against the good teams. And listen, they're going to be significantly better this time next week than they are right now. I just know it. It feels like they're going to make the moves that they need to.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's when this Phillies team will truly be braced up for battle and ready for the long run from the postseason. So we will see if Chad Green will be a part of that or not. We'll be checking in regardless right here on Phillies Digest. Once again, do want to make sure you guys are smashing that subscribe button before we get out of here. That at this point in time, 97.3% of you guys have not subscribed to the channel yet. So let's get that number growing, get this Phillies Digest family expanding and growing a little bit more on the channel. We'll be back every step of the way. Make sure you're smashing that subscribe, dropping a like and any comments below, and talk to you next time right here on Phillies Digest. Peace.